Marigold's Party. Written and read by Shan McFadden. Marigold was 7 years old. Not 6.5, not 6 3/4, but 7, right on the nose. She felt a whole year older, and as she skipped into the kitchen, she was positive that her legs had gotten longer overnight, because every stride seemed to get her there faster than it had the day before. "Happy birthday, Pumpkin," said her dad as he busily frosted her birthday cake. Balloons and streamers hung from the ceiling, and the kitchen table had been set with decorative paper plates and pointy birthday hats. Just the sight of all the decorations made Marigold so excited that she clapped her hands and hopped up and down. "How long till the party?" said Marigold. "I can't wait, I can't wait, I can't wait!" Dad looked at his watch and accidentally dripped pink icing all over his shirt. "Pretty soon," he said as he scooped up an icing drip with his finger and popped it in his mouth. "Guess she'll be here in about 10 minutes. You just have to hold on a little bit longer." Marigold took a deep breath to calm herself down and then counted all the plates on the table. There were 7 brightly colored paper plates. One for her, one for Mom, one for Dad, one for Grammy, one for her brother Buzz, one for her cousin Wiby, and one for her new friend Melody. Melody had just moved in down the street, and Marigold really liked her, so she wanted to make a good impression. The party had to be perfect. "Where's Buzz?" she asked suspiciously. Her older brother was a nice enough guy, but he had a reputation for being a total cake monster. Buzz loved cake so much that he often snuck pieces of other people's birthday cakes before they'd even had a chance to blow out the candles. That's why Marigold had insisted that her dad make a double-layer cake, so that there'd be more than enough for Buzz and everyone else. Still, she didn't think it was a good idea to leave the cake unguarded, just in case Buzz was lurking somewhere nearby. "Oh, he and your mom went out this morning. Hey, looks like they're just headed up the driveway now. Do me a favor and open the door for them, huh, sweetie? My fingers are all sticky." To make his point, he wiggled his icing-covered fingers at her. Marigold skipped across the kitchen and opened the door. The hulking figure of her big brother Buzz completely filled the doorway. His eyes were vacant and red-rimmed. Something gooey was dripping out of his nose, and his mouth was wide open, with a thick stream of drool running down his chin and across his swollen and bruised jaw. He looked blankly at Marigold and moaned, Marigold screamed and slammed the door shut. "Daddy!" she cried. "Buzz has turned into a zombie!" "Really? I didn't see that one coming," said Dad as he set the finished cake down in the center of the kitchen table. The front door opened again and Marigold's mom pushed her way past Buzz and into the kitchen. "Oh, for goodness sake, he's not a zombie. He's just had his wisdom teeth out, and the dentist gave him goofy gas." "What's goofy gas?" asked Marigold. "It's what dentists give you so it won't hurt so much when they pull your teeth out," said Mom. "It's supposed to just make you feel a little weird, but your brother's so darn big they had to give him an extra big dose, and it's left him all goofy. Help me get him into the living room so he can lay down." Marigold grabbed Buzz's left hand, and Mom grabbed his right hand, and they slowly dragged him through the door and across the kitchen floor. Buzz stumbled along in a daze, his eyes cloudy and unfocused, until he caught sight of Marigold's birthday cake on the table. "Cake! Oh, cake!" wailed Buzz as he lurched hungrily toward the cake. "No, not my cake, Buzz!" yelled Marigold, throwing herself protectively between Buzz and the cake. Dad tackled Buzz from behind and started dragging him toward the living room, while Mom slapped at Buzz's fingers and scolded him. "No, Buzz, no, that's very naughty, Buzz. You settle down and go have a nap on the sofa." Finally, Mom and Dad managed to push Buzz through to the living room, then slammed the door and locked it behind him. Marigold heard Buzz rattle the knob a few times, then heard him groan, "Cake, me cake." Finally, his cries died out, and then there was only silence from behind the door. "He'll be fine once the goofy gas wears off, but we won't let him back in until your party's over, just to be sure. We'll save him a nice big piece of cake and everything will be fine," said Mom reassuringly.
"What's all that racket? Sounds like a Sasquatch coughing up hairballs in here,"
said Grammy as she hobbled up the front steps and in through the open door. Grammy only lived 4 doors down from Marigold's house, but she still insisted on driving her car every time she came to visit. Marigold could hear the engine still running in the driveway. "Oh, hi, Grammy. Thanks so much for coming," said Dad with a sarcastic smile. "Let me go shut your car off for you." He disappeared outside, and a moment later Marigold heard Grammy's car shut off. Mom took Grammy's coat and said,
Grammy, aren't you going to wish Marigold a happy birthday? Our little girl's 7 years old today.
Grammy frowned and squinted at Marigold over her bifocals.
7? You're not 7. Well, you couldn't be more than 4 or 5. It's not nice to fool old ladies, you know. We've got enough problems already, what with arthritis and trying to learn this dang internet nonsense.
"I really am 7, Grammy," said Marigold as she rolled her eyes.
Oh, sure you are. Happy birthday, you little fibber,
grumbled Grammy as she settled into a seat at the table.
When do we eat around this place? I'm starving.
Dad came marching back into the house, looking flustered. "Look, Wiby, I don't need a dog walker because I don't have a dog. It's as simple as that." Marigold's cousin Wiby followed Dad into the kitchen and continued his sales pitch. "I respect your point of view, Uncle Brian, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. What if you get a dog tomorrow? Who's gonna walk it? You? You're a busy man. You can't be expected to walk your own dog. So, you can save yourself all that hassle by pre-purchasing my dog walking coupons now. At a discounted family rate, of course. 5 walks for $5. How can you say no to that?" Wiby was a year older than Marigold and lived across the street. Dad described Wiby as being ruthlessly industrious. Marigold didn't know what that meant, but she did know this. Wiby had a lot of part-time jobs. In addition to walking dogs, he cut lawns, babysat, washed cars, pruned trees, painted fences, and cleaned pools. He also groomed pets, painted portraits, read people's fortunes, and ran a small bakery out of his mother's kitchen. Wiby was always advertising his services through homemade flyers that he printed on his parents' computer and distributed throughout the neighborhood. Dad turned with an annoyed expression and looked Wiby right in the eye. "Look, you want to know how I can say no, Wiby? Because I don't have a dog. That's how." "Fair enough, Uncle Brian," said Wiby with a good-natured smile. "But let's not be hasty. You don't need to make a decision right now. I'll just leave a flyer in your mailbox." "Wiby, there are so many of your flyers in my mailbox that there's no room for mail anymore." "No worries. I'll just send you an email then. Saves trees anyway. Good call, Uncle Brian." Dad shook his head and muttered something under his breath that Marigold couldn't hear. Wiby gave Marigold a big hug and handed her a stack of coupons. "Happy birthday, kiddo. Here you go. There's coupons for 10 free room cleanings from my housekeeping service. You won't have to clean your room for months. All courtesy of Wiby Industries. Oh, and there's a coupon in there for a free hair braiding from my hairdressing service, too." Thanks, Wib," said Marigold. She wasn't sure that her hair was long enough to braid yet, but she knew that it was the thought that counted. "Think nothing of it, pal," said Wiby with a grin as he took his place at the table. "Great-looking cake, Uncle Brian. You know, I was offering half-price cakes all this week at Wiby's bakery. I really could have baked one for you and saved you the time." "Thank you, Wiby," groaned Dad. "I'll try to remember that next year." Marigold heard a quiet knock, and when she looked up, she saw her friend Melody standing in the doorway, holding a yellow gift bag with a big pink bow on it. Melody peeked inside the kitchen shyly and said, Happy birthday, Marigold." Marigold ran over and gave Melody a big hug. Come in," she said. "This is my family." She introduced everyone, and Melody gave each person a timid wave. "Nice to meet you, Melody," said Wiby. "Say, you don't happen to have a cat or dog that are in need of a bath or a haircut, do you?" "Oh, leave the girl alone, Wiby," scolded Mom. "Just let her enjoy the party in peace." Marigold leaned in close to Melody and whispered, "Sorry about my cousin. He's a bit weird." Melody giggled and said, "That's okay. I think he's kind of funny." Marigold shrugged and said, "He is, but he's funny in a weird way." Wiby eyed the cake and said, "When does this party get rolling? I don't mean to rush things along, folks, but I've got to mow Mrs. Avery's lawn at 2:30, so sooner would definitely be better." Dad set down some silverware on the table and said, "Hold on to your horses, Wiby. We haven't even cut the cake yet." At the mention of the word cake, a loud thump was heard from behind the locked living room door. This was followed by a dragging sound and then a second thump that shook the doorknob slightly. Everyone stopped talking for a moment. "What was that?" asked Melody. She looked a bit nervous, and Marigold started to panic. The last thing she wanted was for Buzz to do something awful and ruin the party for Melody and everyone else. Marigold gave Mom a pleading look, and then Mom said, "Oh, that was probably just the neighbors. I think they're building a new deck. Probably just them thumping around." Then Grammy said,
"I bet it was that Sasquatch I heard when I got here. It was making an awful racket, moaning and groaning. No one else claimed to hear it, but I know what I heard. They're all just a bunch of fibbers."
Marigold laughed nervously and then whispered, "My Grammy's kind of funny too." Melody smiled, and seeing this made Marigold relax a bit. Buzz had quieted down again and the party was running smoothly. But then she saw something that really puzzled her. There was something that looked like a long green tail protruding from the collar of Wiby's short-sleeved t-shirt. Marigold stared at the tail for a moment and then jumped with a start when it suddenly disappeared back inside the shirt. A moment later, a small green reptilian face peeked out from one of Wiby's shirt sleeves. "Wib," said Marigold cautiously, "I think there's something living in your shirt." Wiby laughed, then reached inside his shirt to pull out a small green lizard with a long tail and bumpy frills on its spine. The lizard's small body fit neatly in Wiby's hand, and its tail and legs dangled freely in the air. "Oh, that's just Donald," said Wiby as he stroked the lizard's head with his free hand. "He belongs to the Jenkins down the street. I'm looking after him while they're on vacation as part of my pet-sitting service. He's an iguana, but he's just a baby. Aren't you, little guy? You're just a little baby." Donald sat happily on Wiby's hand and blinked at Marigold. "He's so cute," said Melody. She held out her hand and let Donald rub his face against her fingers. "Wiby, you're not going to let Donald run loose on the table while we're eating, are you?" said Mom with a tone that made it very clear what answer she expected from him. "Oh, of course not, Aunt Sarah," said Wiby. "Wiby Enterprises puts a high value on cleanliness. I'll put Donald back in my shirt and wash my hands before we eat the cake." Again, the mention of the word cake elicited a thump from behind the door, then a faint scratching sound and an almost inaudible, whispering cry of "Cake!" "What was that? Did someone say something?" said Wiby. His eyes were wide and suspicious. Marigold looked to her dad with a desperate expression, and Dad said quickly, "Oh, sorry about that, guys. I think I left the TV on. Just ignore it." "Why don't you grab some matches and we'll let Marigold blow out her candles? That'll be fun," said Mom. Dad grabbed some matches from the kitchen drawer and began lighting the candles, while Wiby and Melody continued to pet Donald, the baby iguana. The little lizard seemed to be delighted with all of the attention. When Wiby decided that it was time for Donald to go back inside the shirt, the iguana crawled right out again, looking for more cuddles. Grammy grimaced, pointed at Donald, and shouted,
"That boy has a crocodile in his hands. What type of a lunatic brings a crocodile to a birthday party?"
"That's not a crocodile, Grammy. It's just an iguana. It's a type of lizard," said Dad impatiently as he tried to relight one particular candle that refused to stay lit. Wiby held Donald up to Grammy's face and said, "See, Grammy? He's just a baby. He won't hurt you." With a sneer, Grammy leaned in close and straightened her glasses. She examined Donald with a very distasteful expression, and Donald examined her right back, laying calmly in Wiby's hands. Grammy and Donald sat only inches apart, practically nose to nose for a long moment. And then, as if she'd come to a sudden horrific realization, Grammy threw up her hands and shrieked at the top of her lungs.
"Ah, it is a crocodile! Somebody call the police!"
The loud and unexpected sound startled Donald. He jumped from Wiby's hands and began darting around the table, looking desperately for somewhere to hide. "Don't let him get in the cake, Wiby!" shouted Mom. Wiby and Melody snatched frantically for the iguana, but Donald was simply too fast and agile.
"Somebody give me a telephone! I'm calling 911! This place is a madhouse!"
howled Grammy. Dad, who had now managed to light the final candle, accidentally dropped his pack of matches into the middle of the cake. He tried to retrieve them, but between the chaos of the escaped lizard, Grammy's shouting, and the heat of the lit candles, he was having no such luck. Without warning, the match pack burst into flames, gusting out puffs of swirling black smoke. The cake, yelled Marigold. All she could think of was the embarrassment of having Melody come to her party without even getting a piece of cake. "Save the cake, Dad!" There was a loud boom from the living room. Marigold turned slowly, held her breath, and waited, hoping that the noise wouldn't be repeated. But her wishes went unfulfilled. She saw the door hinges shudder as another thud resounded through the kitchen. "Keiko!" pleaded the voice behind the door. Keika! Please, please me, Keika! Wiby stopped chasing Donald and with a terrified expression said, I think there's somebody in there. While Dad tried to reach the flaming match packet with a pair of metal kitchen tongs, and Mom and Melody struggled to recapture the terrified iguana, Grammy managed to retrieve the telephone from its cradle on the kitchen counter. As she attempted to dial 911, Donald suddenly leaped forward and clung to Grammy's arm. From there, he scampered up her shirt and right onto her face, latching onto her nose with his tiny claws. Grammy wailed in anger and pain. Marigold joined Melody in trying to pry Donald loose while Mom tried to wrestle the phone out of Grammy's grasp.
Oh, give me the phone, Grammy,
hollered Mom.
You don't need to call the police. We have everything perfectly under control.
Keika now, please, me Keika, came the voice from behind the door. Wiby walked slowly and cautiously toward the door, as if in a trance, his head cocked slightly to the side. The door shuttered again and the knob turned back and forth. Wiby knelt down and put his head flat to the ground. A moment later he popped up and called out, Uncle Brian, I was looking under the door and I saw a big red eye looking back at me. There is something in there. Dad finally pulled the burning matchbook from on top of the cake and held it in the air with the metal tongs. He shouted, Wiby, whatever you do, do not unlock that door. Wiby looked at Dad with wide, frightened eyes, then back at the doorknob where his hand now rested. He turned back quickly and said, Why not? Just don't do it, said Dad as he tossed the smoldering matchbook into the sink. But what if I already did? Gulped Wiby. His face was pale and his lower lip quivered slightly. He slowly pulled back his hand to reveal that the lock had already been released. Dad shook his head and said, Oh no, Wiby. The door flew open wildly, knocking Wiby over in the process. Buzz hung in the doorway, eyes wide and bleary, mouth wide and goobery, nose wet and boogery, arms outstretched, fingers reaching as he lurched forward and yowled triumphantly, Keika! Keika, yeah! Me Keika now! Buzz stomped over to the table, scooped up the entire cake, plate and all, in both hands, then lifted it to his mouth and buried his face in the icing. Loud slurping, gurgling noises were heard as Buzz quickly ate through one side of the cake and then started working his way toward the middle. Mom surrendered the phone to Grammy and leaped onto Buzz's back. She slapped him on the shoulder and shouted, No, Buzz! Drop it right now! Dad tried valiantly to pry the cake plate out of Buzz's hands, but fueled by a massive sugar rush and the thrill of his recent escape, the goofy-gassed gargantuan had become unstoppable. Buzz threw back his head and let out a victorious roar, causing bits of cake to tumble out of his mouth and down his icing-stained shirt. With Donald still clinging tightly to her nose, Grammy lifted the phone to her mouth, keyed in 911, and shouted,
Police! Fire department! Send help! The house is on fire! There's a Sasquatch in the kitchen! A crocodile is eating my face!
Marigold, Melody, and Wiby all stopped and stared in shock at the chaos around them. Marigold tried to speak, but she simply couldn't think of what to say. 45 minutes later, Marigold sat on the steps of her back porch and wrung out her soaking wet socks. The fire department had arrived just minutes after Grammy's frantic call, and although the smoldering matchbook had been mostly extinguished by that point, they still doused the kitchen with water for good measure. Animal control had arrived next, and seeing neither a Sasquatch nor a crocodile on the premises, had promptly turned around and left. This enraged Grammy, who felt that both Donald and Buzz deserved to be hauled away in cages, so she had hobbled off to her car and chased after the animal control truck, all the while shouting abusive comments through her open window. Mom stood on the sidewalk talking to a police officer. From the way she was stomping her feet and making zombie movements with her hands, Marigold could tell that she was relating the story of Buzz and the goofy gas. The police officer did not look impressed. Dad was in the kitchen mopping up all the excess water that the firefighters had left behind. Wiby stood behind him with Donald perched cheerfully on his shoulder. "Listen, Uncle Brian," said Wiby. "What you really need are my cleaning services. I'm sure that between the two of us we could get this place shipshape in no time." "And how much would that cost me, Wiby?" asked Dad dryly as he wrung out the mop water into a bucket. "Oh, no charge at all, Uncle Brian," said Wiby. "I'm sure I can write it off as a disaster relief donation." Dad leaned on his mop. With a wry smile, he said, "Well, thank you, Wiby. There's another mop in the closet." "Think nothing of it, Uncle Brian," said Wiby. Then he and Donald headed off to find the mop. Marigold hung her damp socks over the porch railing to dry. She crossed her arms as Buzz walked up the front steps. His head hung in shame. The effects of the goofy gas had worn off, and Buzz was back to his old, lovable self. But there was no end to the guilt he felt for having eaten all of Marigold's cake, and for ruining her birthday party.
"I don't even know what to say other than I'm sorry," he said wistfully. "That gas made me really goofy, and I didn't know what I was doing. But still, I hope you can forgive me for wrecking your party."
Marigold frowned and stuck out her chin, but she loved her big brother, and she knew that it hadn't really been his fault. Finally, she said, "It's okay, I guess. How's your mouth?" Buzz rubbed his swollen jaw.
"Oh, getting your wisdom teeth out hurts. I almost wish the goofy gas hadn't worn off."
"Almost." He gave a weak smile and then said,
"Oh, I almost forgot. I found a bit of your birthday cake in my shirt pocket. Must have fell in there while I was stuffing my face. I think it's still okay to eat if you want it."
Buzz stuck out his big hand and opened it to show a small chunk of chocolate cake with a little bit of pink icing still intact. Marigold looked at it for a moment and then laughed and said, "No, it's okay. You can have it." Buzz groaned. He put the cake back in his pocket and said,
"No way. My stomach feels awful. I don't ever want to see another piece of cake as long as I live."
He lay down on the grass in the warm sun with one hand on his aching belly and the other on his throbbing jaw. Marigold sighed. She got up from the step and turned to go back into the house when she heard a quiet voice say, "Hi, Marigold?" Marigold turned to see Melody walking up the steps toward her. She was carrying the same yellow gift bag she'd arrived with earlier. Relieved to see her, Marigold said, "Melody, I thought you went home." Melody smiled and said, "I did, but then I remembered that I didn't give you your present yet. It wouldn't be right for me to come to your party and not give you a present." Marigold took the bag and reached inside. As she rustled through the tissue paper, she said, "Thanks. Sorry the party was such a disaster." Melody just smiled and watched as Marigold pulled a beautiful hardbound book out of the bag. "It's a diary," said Melody. "I hope you don't have one already." "I don't," said Marigold as she flipped through the blank pages. "I'll have so much fun writing in this." Melody said shyly, "I wrote something on the first page." Marigold opened the diary to the first page and read the inscription. "To Marigold, you're a really funny and interesting person. I hope we'll always be friends. From Melody." "Thanks so much," said Marigold as she gave Melody a big hug. Melody laughed and said, "Marigold, that was the most fun party I've ever been to." Written and read by Shan McFadden. Music by Audionautics.com.